Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I'm a single dad. My daughter was at summer camp when the infection broke out. I packed every gallon of water, every can of food, every battery I could find, and hit the road. But every highway checkpoint we approached was already overrun. Now, I'm hiding the van under a collapsed overpass with engine blankets to mask the heat. My daughter's camp is still 140 miles north. I'm not turning back, but I know I can't make it alone. I drive a 2011 Toyota Sienna LE with the 2.7-liter four-cylinder. It's not glamorous, but it sips fuel better than the V6, and the cargo space is why I chose it when I became a full-time parent. I pulled the third row out in the first week of summer and left it in the garage to make room for bikes and inflatable kayaks. Now, that empty bay is the difference between chaos and order. I stacked 16 red 1-gallon water jugs along the left wall using a ratchet strap through the cargo tie-downs. On the right, I lined up 5 5-gallon plastic fuel cans with child-safe caps, each sitting in a shallow oil drain pan to catch spills. A marine battery in a plastic box rides low and forward, feeding a 500-watt PureSign inverter bolted to a plywood panel. A soft case solar kit, 100-watt folding panel, slides against the second-row seatback, next to a roll of aluminized emergency blankets, fiberglass welding blankets, and a roll of duct tape. On the center console, I Velcro-mounted a family radio service handheld and a General Mobile radio service handheld with NOAA weather. Both have spare battery packs that take AA cells. I'm not licensed for the higher power channels, but no one is checking paperwork now. I keep them on scan with the volume barely audible. In the glove compartment is a paper atlas with creased pages and pencil marks from late nights planning alternate routes. I have a compass, a headlamp with a red LED option, and an old $15 tire pressure gauge that still reads accurately. The first hours after the alert were noise and smoke and unanswered calls. Official channels said to shelter in place, but the local radio traffic told a different story. Isolated incidents, then clusters, then neighborhoods with blocked intersections. I filled the fuel cans at a station near closing time, used a siphon to top off from a boat parked at the curb, and paid the owner with a wool blanket and 2 packs of instant coffee. He took the trade without argument. The city started pulling in on itself after midnight. That was when I packed the rest. Propane canisters for the small camp stove, a steel percolator, ramen bricks, canned fruit, peanut butter, a bag of rice, instant oats, a multimeter fuses, brake fluid, motor oil, and a bottle jack. I grabbed 2 sleeping bags, the thick blue tarp from the shed, and the tow strap I never got around to using for anything but helping stuck neighbors. I left at 3:20 a.m., the streets empty except for drifting debris and a city bus parked sideways with its hazard lights blinking. I rolled through green, fuel-saving shifts, keeping the tach just over 2,000 to stay quiet. Headlights off where the moonlight allowed, fog lights on when I needed to see road edges. The first checkpoint sat behind low concrete barriers and 2 Humvees with thermal scopes. The soldiers waved me to the right lane, then everything exploded into flashing movement behind them. I saw silhouettes surge through the floodlights, and I heard someone yell to fall back. I put the van in reverse and backed up slowly, then turned down an exit ramp I had passed a minute earlier. The dashcam caught it all, but I haven't watched that clip again. Every route north had a barricade or a jam of abandoned cars. I learned to read the skyline for a column of smoke and the sound of distant sirens. If both were present, it meant people, and people meant noise, and noise drew the infected. When I found the collapsed overpass, I didn't know if the cracks had been there for years or if something recent had shaken the city. I eased the van up the concrete embankment onto a patch of shadow beneath a slab of roadbed that had dropped onto its supports like a broken jaw. I cut the engine and let the cooling fan spin down. The aluminized emergency blankets aren't magic, but they reflect radiant heat well enough to flatten the engine's glow against the concrete. I waited 5 minutes, listening. A single figure stumbled by, barefoot, clothes torn, head twitching toward the sound of a distant siren. It didn't see me. I spent the rest of the night in the driver's seat with the seatbelt still on, a tourniquet staged in the door pocket, the small first aid kit open on the passenger seat, and a note on the dash reminding me to crack the rear windows to avoid carbon monoxide when I ran the fan. At first light, 6:08 a.m., I slid out, keeping low. I pulled a welding blanket over the hood and windshield, taped the edges to the concrete, and tucked an emergency blanket under the front bumper so the rising heat would vent forward in a narrow band up the wall. The trick isn't to disappear, it's to look like background. I clipped a brass bell to a string across the embankment to my right, connected by a scrap of fishing line to a dangling soda can full of pebbles. If anything brushed through, I'd hear it. I sipped instant coffee through a travel mug and opened the atlas on my lap. The camp where my daughter was supposed to be, Camp Cedar Ridge, sat against national forest land near a lake that is a narrow crescent on the map with a public boat ramp and a ranger station 3 miles east on a county road. The distance from the southern edge of the city to the camp was 140 miles by the highway. I drew 3 alternate lines. One by back roads that paralleled the interstate west of the valley, one that dog-legged east through farm towns, and one that took logging spurs I knew from day hikes years ago. The notes beside the routes are simple: bridges, fuel, choke points, town sounds. I rationed fuel by hours, not miles. The Sienna gets around 24 miles per gallon at 50 miles per hour on flat ground with a light foot. In stop and go, it drinks twice that. I set a strict rule: drive only when I can maintain steady speed with clear sight lines, even if it means waiting. The clock becomes more useful than the odometer when you're trying to outlast everything that wants you to rush. By 8:30 a.m., a convoy of pickups rolled past on the frontage road below. 4 vehicles, nose to tail, hazard lights on. I watched them long enough to see the 4th truck slow at an intersection as 3 figures approached. The first 2 turned toward the sound of the engines. The third broke into a sprint. The driver gunned it and clipped the curb. The second pickup's tailgate popped open, and a generator slid out with a bang. The radios on my dash flared with overlapping chatter. Someone on a GMRS repeater asking if anyone was at the church lot. Someone else asking for a medic at the West Bridge. I turned the volume down until the voices were a whisper and waited. At noon, I crept out and stretched a folding panel into the sun between 2 chunks of concrete, angling it toward the south. The charge controller lit up, and the marine battery began to climb from 12.1 to 12.6 volts. I set the fan to low and let the cabin purge heat. Lunch was instant oats with peanut butter stirred in, then a vitamin tablet and a careful count of water. No matter how much I packed, water vanishes faster than your mind thinks it will. Shortly after 1 p.m., I met Lila. She came along the shoulder from the direction of the river, walking in a slow zigzag like she had trained herself to spot movement. She wore hiking shoes, navy scrubs, and a reflective running vest. A stethoscope hung around her neck, looped tight like a necklace. Her hair was pulled through the back of a baseball cap, and she carried a day pack with the waist strap cinched. I watched her stop at the base of the embankment and study the concrete slab that hid me. She didn't call out. She slid the pack off, took out a plastic water bottle, and set it on the ground with exaggerated slowness. Then she backed 2 steps away and raised both hands, palms empty. "Do you need a nurse?" she asked, looking not at the concrete but a little to the left as if talking to a person who might be anywhere. "Do you need a ride?" I said, my voice too loud in my own ears. I kept the welder's blanket over the hood, then peeled back one corner and showed my face. We had the conversation you have now, the one that dances around trust. She said she had been at a clinic that tried to set up a triage point, then moved patients to a school gym when the hospital diverted ambulances to the airport. She stayed until the gym ran out of generator fuel. She had a brother who might have been headed south, she wasn't sure. I told her my daughter's name and where I was going. We traded 3 facts that could be checked: street names, landmarks, things you can't fake easily, and then we did something that felt old-fashioned. We shook hands. I showed her the layout of the van. She nodded at the water storage and the way I had ratchet-strapped the fuel cans. "I can do better on the first aid side," she said, "if you let me rebalance your kit." She opened her day pack and laid out trauma shears, nitrile gloves, gauze rolls, tape, a headlamp, saline, a compact blood pressure cuff, and a small laminated card with dosage guidelines for common over-the-counter medications. She worked quickly, talking through each change like she was teaching a class. When she finished, my scattered supplies were consolidated into 2 labeled pouches: immediate and follow-up. The next thing I learned about Lila was that she was calm. Calm when the radios crackled, calm when 3 figures appeared at the far end of the overpass and began to pick their way along the barrier. Calm when one of them fell and the other 2 swiveled at the noise. "We need to move," she said, and it sounded like a sentence from a training manual rather than a plea. We waited another hour for the sun to bend and the neighborhood sounds to fade. At 5:10 p.m., we eased the blankets away, coiled the bell line, and I shifted into neutral and let the van roll down the embankment. The engine fired on the first turn. I kept it at 30 miles per hour on the frontage road, eyes flicking between mirrors and the next intersection. We took the first left that led away from the interstate and into a grid of light industrial side streets, then cut north toward a canal road I had traced in pencil the night before. The canal road ran arrow straight behind warehouses and empty lots. A chain-link gate stood open and I saw fresh tire tracks in the dust. We were alone, then we weren't. A cargo van slid out from a loading bay to block the road, and 2 figures stepped from behind a dumpster with their hands up. I braked and kept both hands at the top of the wheel. The taller one wore a hard hat with a headlamp and a safety vest with silver tape. The other had on a climbing harness with a canvas gear sling full of carabiners and a coil of static rope. The taller one spoke first. "Power company," he said, pointing to the logo on his vest. "We're looking for a lift to the north edge. Lines are down. We're not asking for your fuel. We're asking for 5 miles. 2 miles, I said without thinking, measuring risk in odd increments. And you help move a car out of the way if we hit a blockage. He smiled like he understood the math. "Name's Carlos. This is May. We're not heroes. We move obstacles. That's what we do." Lila leaned forward so they could see her face. "We're headed to a camp north of the valley. If you can give us 30 seconds of brute force when we need it, we'll give you more than 2 miles. They slid into the second row, gear on the floor between their boots. Carlos carried a fiberglass-handled sledgehammer and a folding shovel. May had a come-along hand winch in her lap and a driver's smile that made me believe in forward motion again. At the first intersection, we met the reason they were traveling together. A delivery truck had jackknifed across the road, its back corner resting against a light pole. The front tires were shredded. We had 20 feet of clearance on the right if we could move the rear bumper 6 inches. May hopped out, set the parking brake chocks from our van under the truck's rear tire to stop any roll, then clipped the come-along to a steel guardrail post in the truck's rear frame. "Slow," she said, cranking with her shoulder into the handle. The cable tightened, the truck shifted a whisper, and we had our clearance. I idled through at 5 miles per hour. Lila watched my mirrors while Carlos, riding with the door cracked, scanned alleys and side doors with a small aluminum flashlight cupped in his palm. We passed a bakery that still smelled faintly of yeast and sugar, a bike shop with the lights on but no one inside, a tire store with its display tires knocked onto the sidewalk. I noted locations without saying them out loud. Where there are tools, there are reasons to come back, but only if the way behind you stays open. We reached the north edge of the industrial zone as the street turned to Farm Road and the sun sank behind a low line of trees. Carlos pointed to a service yard with a hinged gate lock. "We'll peel off here," he said. "If you make it to the county line, bypass the town. The sheriff frequency has been calling for quiet around their office all afternoon. That's not a good sign." I asked what he meant. He said that on a normal bad day, law enforcement asks for people to stay away from a specific scene. When they say nothing but quiet, it means the radio is not for the public anymore. It means they've given up tight coordination and are trying not to draw attention. May handed me the come-along and a coil of webbing. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it more than we will, and we still have one in the yard." We parted like people who might see each other again. It felt possible in the slow gold of that hour. We took a 2-lane north, the speedometer needle hovering at 42, the engine quiet, the temperature gauge steady. Lila read road signs aloud like a second pair of eyes, and I let the steadiness of the white line pull us forward. We avoided the first town by cutting onto a farm track that paralleled the railway. The tracks kept us honest about our direction and gave us a path if we needed to bail to gravel. Dusk gathered without ceremony. We pulled into the shadow of a grain elevator under a line of cottonwoods and shut down. I placed the welding blanket over the hood, propped with a stick so heat could seep out and up. Lila cooked noodles on the tailgate using the small stove and a canister marked with a black Sharpie to track fuel use by hash marks. We ate without talking much, then set up for sleep in shifts. I took the first watch until 1 a.m. while she slept in the second row, with a jacket over her face to block the glow from the radio. On watch, time slows into small tasks. I wrote my daughter's name on a piece of duct tape and stuck it to the dash just to see it. I checked tire pressures by touch, the warmth of the sidewall, the give under thumb, then actually used the gauge to confirm. I wiped the headlight lenses with a damp microfiber cloth to remove the thin dust that dulls output. I counted remaining fuel. 4 full cans, 1.5 in the tank, 1 can opened for the generator that I had never started. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, counting to 12. I didn't pray. I just wanted the van to stay small and forgettable under the trees. I woke Lila at 1 a.m. and slept until a dreamless 3:40 a.m. when the bell, now strung between a tree and the bumper, chimed 3 sharp notes. Lila's hand touched my shoulder, already calm. We listened. Steps. Not the erratic scrape I'd heard in the city, but soft, deliberate footfalls. A beam of light swept low along the gravel near the tracks, then clicked off. I stayed still. A minute later, a voice came, low and careful from the dark. "Coming up on your driver's side, hands open, just me." I cracked the door. The silhouette was compact, a backpack slung high, a long object broken down and lashed to the side like a tent pole. He stepped into a strip of starlight and showed his empty palms. "Name's June," he said, voice slow. "Junior, actually, but everyone calls me June." He had a Park Service patch on his sleeve and the quiet of someone who'd spent more nights alone than not. He asked for water, we asked for news. He had both good and bad. Good. The county roads north of us were mostly clear if we bypassed 2 known choke points where the state patrol had tried to set perimeters. bad. The campgrounds around the lake near Cedar Ridge had seen traffic. Some campers stayed, most left in a rush. He had seen a line of school buses, likely borrowed for evacuation, parked near the ranger station yesterday afternoon. He had also seen a hand-painted sign at the intersection 2 miles south of the lake that read, "Cedar Ridge moved to North Shore." Moved could mean anything. It could mean a planned relocation to a safer area. It could mean a desperate flee. But it meant the camp hadn't simply been erased. It meant people were trying. June carried a lever-action .357 carbine broken into 2 pieces in a scabbard, the barrel wrapped to keep dust out. He didn't wave it around. He set it beside his pack and sat on his heels like a ranger briefing hikers. "If you're going to drive at night," he said, "aim to hit the long stretches between 3 and 5. That's when even the anxious get tired. That's when the infected drift. Stop before dawn to let the world move around you while you stay still." We offered a ride to the next junction. He countered with a guidance fee in the form of information. Route notes scribbled on a notepad torn from a wildlife survey booklet. He refused water until he'd given us the notes, then took one measured drink and capped the bottle as if he had been rationing since spring. Before he left, he looked into the van and saw the small drawing taped behind my seat. My daughter's blue marker sketch of our minivan with bikes on the back, stick figures inside. He nodded once. "You'll get there," he said, and I wanted to believe. We used his notes like scripture for the next leg. At 4:10 a.m., we rolled out, lights low, the van set to recirculate to avoid pulling in any smell that might give us away. We passed a farmyard where the dogs did not bark. We passed a gas station with the canopy lights on and the pumps dead. We passed a darkened diner with a sign reading "Back at 6" that no one had flipped since yesterday. On the weather band, a pre-recorded message played on a loop, advising residents to check local guidance and limit travel. It was the word "limit" that stung. Limiting is for people with choices. At 5:35 a.m., we encountered our first true roadblock. A Kentucky Blue Semi jackknifed on a narrow bridge, its trailer at a shallow angle to the guardrail. The driver's door stood open. The cab was empty. The bridge had a low concrete wall just high enough to ruin any thought of squeezing by. I killed the engine and we listened. Water rushed under the bridge. A bird called twice. No other sounds. We set to work. The come-along from May saved us. I anchored to a stout steel post at the bridge's corner and ran the cable under the back of the trailer, hooking to a crossmember. Lila wedged double blocks of wood under the trailer tire to prevent a rollback. I cranked until my shoulders burned. The trailer crept towards straight. Inch by inch we gained, the cable singing a quiet high note. When the angle was barely passable, we stopped and reassessed. The left rear taillight of the Sienna brushed the concrete as we crept through. We came out the other side with a long breath and a whispered thank you to every person who had ever taught me to go slow. Sunrise found us on the far side of the county line. We pulled into a farm field approach and set the blankets again. Breakfast was oatmeal with a handful of raisins. Lila checked vitals out of habit. Pulse, respirations, skin temp. "You'll make a good patient if we ever have to write a chart on you," she said. We both laughed in a way that didn't sound like laughter. We napped in 20-minute blocks and woke to the sound of a small engine. A quad went by on the gravel road. 2 teenagers in bike helmets and work gloves. A crate strapped to the back with bungee cords. They didn't slow. I noted the direction for no reason other than habit. In a stable world, that would have meant a farm chore. In this one, it could mean 100 things. Mid-morning, we rolled into the first town we couldn't avoid. A place that still had banners across Main Street from a festival that would never happen. We kept the van moving at 10 miles per hour. Windows up, eyes forward. On the courthouse steps, a man sat with a cardboard sign that read North Shore. He had a backpack and a stainless water bottle and the posture of someone who had asked that question already and been ignored. Lila looked at me. I shook my head. Trust is not binary, but risk today was. I hope he found a ride. At the far end of town, a small grocery still had its doors propped open. A handwritten note on the glass read, "Take what you need, leave what you can, no cash." Inside, the lights were on, and the coolers hummed weakly. Someone had a generator running somewhere out back. I parked nose out, and we went in with empty totes. We moved with the efficiency of parents on a long road trip. Shelf-stable foods, water, a small bag of flour, salt, coffee filters, toothpaste, 2 bars of soap, a roll of 55-gallon trash bags, paper clips, a box of contractor-grade garbage bags, and a single frozen bag of mixed vegetables we ate cold on the sidewalk because we had craved something not brown or beige. I left a fuel can with 2 gallons in the back room and wrote on the note, "Left fuel. Thank you. Traveling north to Cedar Ridge." Past town, the land rose into low, timbered hills. The 2 lanes snaked and the canopy closed overhead. I slowed to 35 and watched for deer. The radio scan picked up a brief burst of structured talk. "Cedar Ridge units, relocate to North Shore Point by 2 p.m. Confirm head count at Rally Point Bravo." The voice was strong and clipped, like someone reading from a plan. Lila and I looked at each other, then at the clock. It was 11:50 a.m. We had a chance. The next 15 miles were all patience. A tree had fallen across half the road. We used the saw on my multi-tool to cut enough small branches to carve a narrow passage. A small sedan had slid off into the ditch. I left a note under the wiper that read North Shore, 2 p.m. if you can walk, and a bottle of water on the hood. We passed a trailhead where a laminated map on a signboard showed the lake as a blue crescent. The North Shore Point sat at the end of a ridge road with a picnic area and a boat launch. I traced the line with my finger and tried to breathe slow. At a pull-off with cell coverage, one flicker of a bar, we tried calling the camp number and my daughter's counselor's phone. Voicemail on both. I left the simplest message I could. "I'm coming. Stay with the group. I will find you." Then we drove. 1 mile from the lake, the air smelled of pine and damp rock. A long queue of vehicles lined the shoulder. Cars, 2 buses, a couple of pickups with kayaks still strapped to their racks. People had left in a hurry, but not in panic. Windows were up, doors closed, a few notes tucked under wipers with names and arrows. At the final curve, the trees opened, and we saw North Shore Point. The picnic area held order. That was the first thing. A volunteer with a neon vest stood on a rock with a clipboard. A ranger truck idled nearby. The 2 school buses faced outward, ready to leave. People sat in family groups on blankets, backpacks stacked neatly. Someone had drawn chalk arrows on the asphalt pointing to a check-in table made from a park bench turned sideways. A hand-painted sign read, "Cedar Ridge, here." My hands shook so badly I had to reset my grip on the wheel. I parked near the far edge where I could exit without backing. Lila and I walked in. An older man with a camp staff t-shirt and a whistle met me halfway. He had a sunburned forehead and the steady eyes of someone who had been saying the same sentence for hours. "Names?" he asked. I gave my daughter's name and my own. He scanned the clipboard. "She was here this morning," he said, and my knees almost failed. They moved half the group to a caretaker's cabin across the cove to spread out. We're staggering departures. The last boat over is due back in 15. 15 minutes can change a life. I stood by the water and watched the glint of sun on the far shore, trying to will the aluminum boat into view. Lila squeezed my arm and pointed to a knot of kids near the check-in. They had camp shirts and bandanas and the posture of kids who had been told to be brave and were doing it with every muscle in their faces. A counselor stood with them, counting under her breath. I walked over and asked, carefully, if any of them knew my daughter. A boy with a freckled nose nodded. "She's with the other half," he said. She helped carry the first aid kit. The boat came into view at 2:22 p.m., a small aluminum fishing boat with a tiller motor, wake fanning out behind. Two teenagers in life jackets rowed the bow, a counselor at the stern. When the boat nosed the dock, parents and staff made a narrow path without being told. The kids stepped off in pairs. My daughter was third. She scanned the crowd and saw me. She didn't scream. She ran, then stopped 2 steps short and looked at my face like she needed to confirm that I was real. We put our foreheads together and counted 10 breaths the way we practiced on hard days. 10 in and out. Then she told me everything in a rush. How the counselors had split the cabins by age and paired each with a staff member who knew first aid. How they had moved to the caretaker's cabin because it had a generator and a propane fridge. How they had kept everyone quiet by playing a game where you could only whisper and got points for staying still. She told me she had helped a younger camper stay calm by drawing small pictures of the lake on a notepad. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the notepad, the top page full of a careful blue crescent. I thanked the counselor until I ran out of words. She shrugged like this was a job and not a miracle. "We're moving to the West Road," she said. "Rangers say the East Road is getting crowded. If you can go now, go now." The ranger in the truck idled closer and lifted a hand in a quiet wave that was also a warning. The volunteer on the rock called out the next instructions to the group. "Order inside urgency. It is rare. It is precious." We loaded my daughter's small duffel and sleeping bag. Lila checked each kid's wristband for allergies before they boarded the bus. She worked like she had always belonged to this camp, and by the end of the 10 minutes everyone thought she did. When the buses pulled away, we didn't follow. The main road would be obvious, and today, obvious was dangerous. We took the ranger's suggestion, West Road, and a map he slid through the window. A photocopied topographic sheet with 2 circles drawn in pencil where the pavement narrowed near a culvert and a blind corner. "Don't stop there," he said. "If you have to stop, stop before or after." The West Road hugged the hillside, a single lane with turnouts. We drove with the windows cracked and the radio off, the van heavy with the addition of a small human who had more gravity than any object. I kept the speed at 30 and the engine in the fat of its torque so I could climb without downshifting. At the first turnout, we paused long enough to string the bell again and listen. The wind moved through leaves. A bee knocked against the mirror, no other sounds. At the second circle on the map, the blind corner, we met our risk. 2 vehicles were nose to nose with their drivers gesturing. A pickup towing a small boat had pulled too far into the curve and couldn't back without jackknifing. The car in front of it had inched forward so close that neither could move. 6 people stood around, voices tight. I stopped a full vehicle length back, set the parking brake, and stepped out with my hands visible. "We can fix this in 3 minutes," I said. "Everyone else, please watch the tree line and stay quiet." I pulled the tow strap from the rear well, looped it around the boat's winch post, and ran it to a stout pine. With the strap holding the boat from rolling, the pickup could back straight. Lila stood by the mirror and gave clear hand signals, 2 fingers for 2 feet, flat hand for stop. We unhitched the boat, rolled the trailer sideways by inches, then rehitched at a better angle. The car went first. The pickup followed. The road was clear. We moved without applause and were rolling again in under 4 minutes. My daughter sat behind me, hands around her notepad, watching out the window. "Are we going home?" she asked. I kept my eyes on the road. "We're going somewhere safe," I said. Home can be a moving thing for a while. She nodded, like that made sense. Children can hold new definitions faster than adults. We cleared the worst of the hill by 4:15 p.m. and reached a junction where the paved road met a gravel logging spur heading northwest. The paved way turned south toward a town I didn't want to approach. The gravel line paralleled the ridge and connected eventually to a highway miles away. We chose gravel. I set the tires to the upper end of their pressure range to protect the sidewalls, then dropped speed to 20, letting the van float rather than fight the washboards. We camped that night in a disused gravel pit where the wind kept the bugs down and the sky was a hard white spill of stars. We parked with the nose pointed out, the blankets on the hood and the bell line running to a juniper. Dinner was rice with a can of chicken and a few shards of broken ramen for salt and crunch. My daughter sat between us on the tailgate, feet swinging. She hums when she is content. She hummed a little, then stopped as if she remembered the rules of the day and whispered, "Sorry," even though she had nothing to be sorry for. I took the late watch. My daughter slept with her head on Lila's jacket, and Lila slept with the stillness I had come to recognize as practiced, not natural. At 1:40 a.m., the GMRS handheld crackled to life with a short burst. 2 clear words, North Shore. Then silence. I wrote it down anyway. When your world shrinks, your ledger becomes a talisman. In the morning, we found a note under the wiper. It was a small square of paper, the handwriting neat. "We saw your blanket trick. Smart. If you want a safer road, there's a service track 300 yards north of here that curves back to the old timber lot, then drops to County 12 without crossing the town. J." I looked around the rim of the gravel pit. No one visible. J could be June. It felt like him. Quiet aid without the need for recognition. We packed at dawn. I walked my daughter through the plan like she was part of the team, and she was. "Your job," I said, "is to count utility poles between here and the turn. When you reach 10, tell me. If you see a white mile marker with the number 5, that means we passed it and need to turn around. If we have to stop, you watch the right side of the road for any movement. If you see anything, you gently tap my shoulder and point." She nodded with seriousness that made my throat tight. The service track was exactly where the note said. A faint 2-track lined with lupine and grasses. We followed it until it curved behind a ridge and opened into an old timber lot where rows of stumps had softened into mossy hills. The track dropped into a gully, then climbed to a gate with a faded "No Trespassing Timber Company" sign. The lock hung from the chain but wasn't closed. I slipped it free, swung the gate, drove through, then set it back as we found it. Leave things like you weren't there, even when the world says you can take what you want. It buys you quiet. County 12 was gravel, and then chip seal, and then honest blacktop. The sky widened. We could see the clouds piling above the far line of hills. Lila checked our water and made the call to stop at the next creek crossing to refill and filter. We drove with one eye on the ditches for a trickle that would become a stream. When we found it, we parked nose out yet again, walked down with water bags, and filled them in the cold flow, careful not to disturb the sediment. Back at the van, Lila ran the squeeze filter while my daughter pumped the small backpacking filter like a champ. We filled 4-gallon jugs and labeled them with the date and filtered. On the far side of the next rise, we found the first sign that the infection had moved into this quiet area. A barn door was open. In the field, 3 figures moved in a rough triangle, making slow arcs like their internal compasses were broken. We shut windows, kept speed steady, and didn't make eye contact. One turned its head as we passed, but the wind was in our favor, and we were gone before its attention gathered. By mid-afternoon, we reached a small county park with a vault toilet and a view over a shallow valley. The picnic tables were sturdy, the wood gray with years of weather. We pulled in and found 3 vehicles parked under the trees. An old Subaru with a kayak on top, a sheriff's SUV with the doors closed and a dark screen, and a utility truck from the power company. My heart knocked twice hard. I looked for the signs Carlos had taught me to seek, equipment racks, chocks, whether things were left in a hurry or set down. The utility truck had its outriggers retracted, the tool drawers closed, the coiled ropes neatly hung. Someone had left on purpose, not in panic. In the shade of the shelter, a message board had appeared. It was a simple sheet of plywood on sawhorses, a plastic sleeve stapled to it with a slot to drop notes. On the board, someone had written in thick marker, "Quiet place. Leave info. No yelling. No running. Listen. Day entries at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Underneath were paper notes with names and arrows drawn to compass points, times, and short phrases. One read, Bus 2 went west 8 a.m. Bus 1 east 7:40 a.m. Cedar Ridge families regroup at the Stone Bridge at 6 p.m. if needed. We added our own note with our names, the time, and our intended route to the northwest to avoid the town. I added a line that said, "If you are June, we took the track. Thank you." I put the paperclip through the corner and slid it into the sleeve. It felt like slipping a bottle into a calm ocean. We ate early, tuna and tortillas with a packet of relish. Then my daughter taught Lila the silent game from camp. You can only talk in signs, and if you need to speak, you tap the table twice. We practiced until the habit felt natural. We would need it. The 6 p.m. gathering at the Stone Bridge was smaller than the messages suggested. 4 families, a couple with a newborn, a man in a postal carrier uniform with his satchel slung across his chest, and an elderly woman with a hand-drawn map. We traded data, not fears, which roads were blocked, which stores were open, where the water ran, where the noise was. The postal carrier, his name was Ellis, had a calm that made people lean toward him. "I'm still doing my route," he said. "Different kind of letters, but same idea. Information is the only thing that travels clean." Ellis had walked in from the next town west. He said the westmost roads were still quiet, but the gas station with the open note now had a small crowd that came and went at all hours. "If you have to go," he said, "go in the early afternoon when people with energy are napping. If you can avoid it, avoid it." The man in the postal uniform smiled at my daughter and handed her a small stack of blank index cards and a golf pencil. "For your maps," he said. She tucked them into her notepad pocket like treasure. We decided to keep moving while we still had gray light. The map showed a ridge road that would add miles but cut contact. I prefer miles over surprises. We said careful goodbyes and rolled out. As we climbed, the air cooled, and the van's temperature needle stayed glued where it should be. The radio scan gave us one last burst, another structured voice reading a relocation code. It ended with a phrase I hadn't heard in 2 days. "Well done." It didn't matter who it was meant for, it helped. We found a turnout with a view over a valley that glowed like a slow-breathing thing. We parked, set the blankets, and I let the engine cool while we stretched our legs. My daughter counted 10 stars in a straight line, a satellite sliding across. Lila rubbed her temples like a person resetting a circuit breaker. We each took a slow drink of water and a half cookie, saved from the camp, because small sweetnesses teach the body it is allowed to be human. That night, the bell rang once at 2:17 a.m. I held my breath and listened. Footsteps. A whisper of fabric. A shape edged into the eyeline. Then a soft clink as something touched the sawhorse we had left under the blanket's edge. "Friend," a voice said, even softer than the footsteps. I cracked the door a sliver and saw the brim of a ranger hat and a smile that lifted one corner. June. He pointed down the road behind him. 2 figures half a mile, he said, moving slow. If you leave now, you won't meet them. We left in 3 minutes, blankets off, straps in, bell stowed, windows up. The van rolled like a whisper in low gear down the grade, the lights warm on the asphalt, not hot. At the bottom of the hill, we paused at a T-intersection. South led toward the town with the crowd. North led toward an old fire road. East climbed to a lookout. I felt for the map in my door pocket and then looked at my daughter. She pointed north without speaking. I smiled and turned the wheel. The fire road narrowed to a single lane with grass down the crown. The van's underbody guards ticked a few times on rocks. We idled around a series of bends until the trees opened to a meadow that had once been a staging area. There, we found what looked like a small miracle. A pallet of bottled water still wrapped in plastic, a stack of MRE boxes under a tarp weighed down by rocks, and a handwritten sign. For travelers, take 2, leave 1 note. We took 2 flats of water and left a note with our route, the condition of the bridge, and the existence of the quiet message board. Lila added a short line about the value of staggered departures. Dawn shared the meadow with us like we were allowed to borrow it. We drove on, and the road met a county blacktop that led, with kinder grades, toward a town whose water tower we could see from 10 miles away. I kept one eye on the gauge and one on the horizon. Behind us, miles of choice. Ahead, miles of responsibility. Beside me, new trust. We reached the town at 9:25 a.m. It had the hush of a Sunday morning, but none of the church bells. A bulletin board by the city hall had sprouted notes like the one at the park. Under a pinned map, someone had drawn a triangle with 3 words at the corners: shelter, fuel, water. Arrows traced loops avoiding the center. I recognized the mind that did this. An operations brain, someone used to setting up a plan for volunteers. We followed the loop to a fuel station where a man with a clipboard and a clean t-shirt checked people in one at a time. Fuel wasn't free, but trade was fair. A gallon for a pound of food or 2 hours of work. We gave a pound of rice and a half hour of lifting. While we waited, my daughter played the silent game with 2 kids near a planter. They traded drawings of trees and a cat. Lila quietly checked a woman's blood pressure at the curb and wrote the numbers down so the woman could keep track over days. I worked security with 2 other people, eyes on the road and the edges. It wasn't about force, it was about posture. It was about standing like people who would notice the wrong kind of approach and step toward it calmly. We left with 9 gallons in the tank and no cans filled. The rule was to prioritize tanks over storage to prevent hoarding and encourage motion. It irritated me and reassured me at the same time. Systems that annoy are often the ones that keep communities going. Past town, the highway forked. The left led to a larger city and the promise of real hospitals and real trouble. The right led into a patchwork of farms and timber. We took the right and started marking potential shelters in my head. A county maintenance yard, a grange hall, a church with a steel roof and a back lot, a pullout under a cut bank that could hide a van if you needed to rest in daylight. At noon, the GMRS radio picked up a repeater ID, and then a live voice with a measured tone. "This is North Valley Relay. We are passing messages twice daily at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. If you need to send word, write it down, keep it under 10 seconds, and we will repeat. Keep your batteries charged. Keep your group small and disciplined. Do not rely on sirens. Rely on each other." I keyed the transmit button and, for 5 full seconds, could not think what to say. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the right traffic. We camped again that night at a wayside with a line of stones and a sign about wildflowers. Lila taught my daughter how to splint a sprained wrist using a rolled magazine and a bandana. I taught her how to change a tire without letting the van shift off the jack, which I hoped she would never need. She taught us the camp song under her breath, not singing, just saying the words like reading a story. That was when I realized what we had built in 3 days. A crew. Not a family yet. Families take time and the quiet safety to be imperfect, but a crew that knew each other's jobs and trusted each other's instincts. We were still a long way from safe, but we were no longer alone. 2 days later, the road delivered us to the edge of a valley, where a broad river curved through hayfields and the highway arched over on a new concrete bridge. The far side of the bridge shimmered with heat, and for a second I thought I saw motion. I slowed to a crawl. Lila lifted the binoculars, then slowly handed them to me. On the far side, a line of vehicles sat, spaced out at neat intervals, facing outward like sentries. Behind them, tents, beyond the tents a billboard repainted by hand. Cedar Ridge families welcome here. Check in. Keep it quiet. Keep it kind. No barricade, no shouting. A sign with rules big enough to read without stopping. No loud engines, lights low after 9 p.m., no open fires. Sanitation station this way. Someone had made an answer to chaos using cones and paint in the simplest language possible. We crossed, and for the first time since the first night under the overpass, I felt my shoulders drop from my ears. The check-in was a folding table manned by 2 teenagers with notebooks. An adult stood behind them with a relieved smile that said they had been waiting for help that now arrived 1 car at a time. We gave names again. We were waved to a spot along the outer ring. The rules were clear. The tone was not military but disciplined. Generators could run in the afternoon only. Cooking stoves at the designated tables only. Quiet after dark. If you had extra, you wrote it on the board. If you needed something, you wrote that too. I met Ellis again under the shade of a billboard post. He had made it here on foot, still carrying his satchel like a uniform. "We're making a map," he said, and smiled at my daughter. "You want to draw the lake?" She did. He handed her a clipboard with a grid and a pencil. She sketched the crescent with care, then added a small square where the caretaker's cabin sat, a dot where we had camped in the gravel pit, and a star where we were now. Ellis labeled each and then added a small note at the bottom. First version, day 4. By late afternoon, the camp hummed with quiet purpose. A retired plumber had set up a wash station using food-grade barrels, PVC pipe, and a foot pump. A teacher had started a kids' circle under a tree and was reading a book aloud a page at a time. A nurse, Lila, had a list of people to check on and a volunteer to help her take vitals. A ranger, June, had, according to rumor, walked the perimeter twice and hung small bells along the downwind side. And me, a single dad with a minivan, had been asked to help rig a shade canopy over the main table and draw up a refueling plan that avoided fumes near the tents. It wasn't heroics. It was competence used in public. At sunset, someone said a few words that were not a prayer and not an order. "Thank you for staying quiet. Thank you for staying kind. We'll do it again tomorrow." Then the lights dimmed, engines went silent, and the camp settled into a whisper of zippers and low voices. I sat on the bumper with my daughter and watched the stars until she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder. I know this isn't the end. Camps like this are waypoints, not destinations. Supplies run down. People arrive who need more help that we can give. Routes change. But for now, we have a plan that fits inside a day, and then another. We have a van that starts, water that is filtered, fuel that is measured, radios that are charged, and a crew that knows its jobs. We have neighbors who listen. We have a board where you can leave a note and expect it to be read. We have a lake that reflects starlight and wind without carrying sound too far. We have a bell line on the downwind edge that is only rung for friends. Tomorrow, we'll scout the west road in pairs and mark the safe turnouts with chalk arrows facing only one way so strangers can't read them backward. We'll add windbreaks to 2 cook stations and dig gray water sumps with gravel. We'll inventory medical supplies and start a simple check-in sheet for anyone with daily meds. We'll ask the ranger to teach kids the hand signals for stop, quiet, and come back, so they are part of this with agency and not just rules. We'll assign a map team, Ellis and my daughter among them, to keep the living map current at 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. And when we roll out, because at some point we will, I'll do it the same way I started. Slow, measured, nose pointed out, blankets ready, radios low, and our names written on a card by the dash to remind me what the objective is. Not to get there fast, to get there together. If you are listening on GMRS in this valley, if you are scanning for any voice that doesn't sound like panic, hear this. Travel in daylight when you can keep a steady speed, and in the hour before dawn if you must move in the dark. Avoid towns with constant noise. Use paper maps as if your battery will always die. Filter more water than you think you need. Write your route on a card and leave it where a stranger with good intent can find it. Tie a bell to your downwind edge. Keep your engines cool before you park. Wear gloves. Share rules that work. Keep it quiet. Keep it kind. I am a single dad with a minivan. My daughter is beside me, drawing a better map than I could draw on my best day. The camp's lights are dimmed. The bell hasn't rung. The lake smells like pine and stone. The road ahead is long, but we are no longer alone on it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.